The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, Montana territory, as Cole Brennan lifted his nephew onto his hip and adjusted the black Stetson that had belonged to his father. The boy was getting heavier now, 3 years old and full of questions about everything his wide blue eyes landed on. Nothing like Cole's own dark features. But then again, Tommy had his mother's coloring, or so Cole had been told. "Uncle Cole, look!" Tommy's small finger pointed toward the general store window, where a carved wooden horse sat among jars of penny candy and bolts of calico fabric. "Horsey!" Cole's chest tightened the way it always did when the boy called him uncle. 3 years of raising this child, 3 years of being the only parent Tommy had ever known, and still the word felt like a knife between his ribs. Uncle. Not father, never father. That honor had belonged to his younger brother James, dead these 4 years in a saloon brawl in Denver. Dead before he even knew the saloon girl he'd gotten pregnant had died bringing his son into the world. At least that's what Cole's father had told him on his deathbed. "The boy needs you, Cole. He's got no one else. Your brother's wild ways caught up with him. And that girl, well, women like that don't survive childbirth in places like that. But the baby lived. Your brother's son, your blood, you take him. You raise him right." So Cole had. He'd taken the squalling infant, hired a wet nurse, learned to change diapers and sing lullabies in his rough rancher's voice. He'd watched Tommy take his first steps, heard his first words, taught him to recognize horses and cattle, and the difference between a hawk and an eagle in the sky. He'd become everything a father should be, except he could never claim the title. Because Tommy wasn't his son. Tommy was his brother's mistake, and Cole was just the man who'd stepped up when no one else would. "Can we go see the horsey?" Tommy tugged at Cole's collar, his innocent face so full of hope it made Cole's heart ache. "Maybe later, buddy. We need to get supplies first." Cole shifted the boy's weight and headed toward the feed store, trying to ignore the stares from townspeople who still whispered about the lonely rancher raising his dead brother's bastard child, trying to ignore how much it hurt that the only family he had left wasn't really his at all. He'd gotten good at ignoring things, the loneliness that gnawed at him every night after Tommy fell asleep. The way his hands remembered the shape of a woman's waist even though it had been 4 years since he'd held one. The dreams where someone with a kind voice and gentle hands helped him raise the boy, made the ranch house feel less like a tomb and more like a home. But Cole Brennan had learned the hard way that dreams were dangerous things. He'd lost his brother to wild dreams of easy money and fast women. He'd lost the woman he'd loved before the war to his father's interference and his own damn pride. All he had left was this boy who called him uncle, and a ranch that barely broke even most years. It would have to be enough. What Cole didn't know, as he walked past the hotel where a woman stood at the window, watching him with tears streaming down her face, was that his carefully constructed world of partial truths and protective lies was about to shatter. The woman at the window had Tommy's same blonde hair, the same blue eyes, the same shape to her face that Cole saw every time he looked at his nephew. And she'd traveled 800 miles to reclaim the son that had been stolen from her 3 years ago. The son she'd been told was dead, the son who was very much alive in the arms of the only man she'd ever loved. The man she'd been told had died at Gettysburg. In Redemption Creek, Montana territory, 3 lives were about to collide with the force of a runaway train, and the truth that emerged from the wreckage would destroy everything Cole Brennan thought he knew about his family, his brother, and the little boy who'd saved him from drowning in grief. But first there would be lies. So many lies. Because the biggest lie of all was the one Cole's father had told him from his deathbed, the one that had let Cole sleep at night for 3 long years. Tommy wasn't James Brennan's son at all. He was Cole's. Cole had just finished loading 50-pound sacks of feed into the back of his wagon when he felt it. That peculiar sensation of being watched, the kind that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up and his hand drift instinctively toward the Colt revolver he still wore from his Army days. 4 years after Appomattox, and he still couldn't shake the habits war had burned into his bones. He turned slowly, scanning the street with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent 3 years watching for Confederate sharpshooters. Nothing seemed out of place. Mrs. Henderson was sweeping the boardwalk in front of her boarding house. Old Pete was asleep in his usual chair outside the saloon, his hat pulled low over his weathered face. A few horses stood hip-shot at the hitching rails, tails swishing at flies in the afternoon heat. But the feeling persisted. Tommy tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Cole, I'm hungry." "I know, buddy." "We'll get some lunch at Miss Betty's before we head back to the ranch." Cole lifted the boy back onto his hip, but his eyes kept sweeping the street. There, the hotel, second-floor window, a flash of movement, a curtain falling back into place, probably just a traveler passing through. Redemption Creek wasn't much of a destination, but it sat on the stage route between Helena and Butte, so they got their share of merchants and miners and the occasional fancy man from back east looking to invest in Montana copper. Still, something about that glimpse of movement bothered him. Something familiar in the shape of the shadow behind that curtain. "Cole Brennan." The voice came from behind him, and Cole turned to find Sheriff Tom Mackenzie approaching, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "Got a minute?" Cole set Tommy down on the wagon seat, handed him a piece of hard candy from his pocket to keep him occupied. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Mackenzie was a good man, one of the few in town who didn't look at Tommy like he was something shameful that should be hidden away. He'd fought for the Union same as Cole, lost an arm at Cold Harbor, and come west looking for a fresh start like so many other broken soldiers. "Got a woman asking questions about you." Mackenzie kept his voice low, his eyes flicking toward Tommy to make sure the boy was out of earshot. "Checked into the hotel this morning on the stage from Helena. Said she's looking for Cole Brennan, rancher, about 32 years old, would have a young boy with him." Cole's gut tightened. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that made me want to warn you before she found you herself." Mackenzie shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "She asked if you were married, if the boy was yours, if there was a woman in your life." He paused. "She asked if your brother James was still alive." The world seemed to tilt slightly under Cole's boots. "What did you tell her?" "Told her James died 4 years back, which is the truth as I know it. Told her you were raising his boy, which is what you told me when you moved here." Mackenzie's good hand rested on his gun belt. "But Cole, she started crying when I said that. Not the polite kind of crying, the kind that comes from deep down, like something broke inside her." Cole's mind raced. Who would come looking for James after all these years? And why would hearing about his death cause that kind of grief when by all accounts James had been nothing but a charming scoundrel who left broken hearts and unpaid debts in every town he passed through? "Did she give you a name?" "Margaret Sullivan. Goes by Maggie. Said she used to know your family back before the war." Mackenzie studied Cole's face. "You know her?" The name hit Cole like a cavalry charge. Margaret Sullivan. Maggie with the honey-colored hair and eyes like a summer sky. Maggie who used to bring fresh bread to his mother when she was sick. Maggie who'd let him kiss her behind the church after the Independence Day dance in '61, just weeks before he'd ridden off to war. Maggie who his father had told him died of influenza in the winter of '63, while Cole was freezing in the trenches at Fredericksburg. "I knew her," Cole said slowly, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "A long time ago, but she's dead. My father told me she died during the war." Mackenzie's expression shifted, something like pity crossing his scarred face. "Well, she's alive as you or me, and she's in room 7 at the hotel right now." "And Cole?" He hesitated. "She brought papers with her. Legal papers, the kind that have seals and signatures." "What kind of papers?" "The kind that say she's somebody's mother." The words hung in the air between them like gun smoke after a duel. Cole felt the ground shift beneath his feet, felt the careful structure of his life beginning to crack. "That's not possible." But even as he said it, Cole was looking at Tommy, really looking at him. The blonde hair that was nothing like the Brennan family's dark coloring, the blue eyes that didn't match Cole's gray or James's brown, the shape of his face, the curve of his smile, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. All features that had belonged to Maggie Sullivan. "You need to talk to her," Mackenzie said quietly. "Whatever's going on here, whatever your father told you, That woman up there has been crying for 3 hours straight, and she keeps saying, 'He's alive, my baby's alive,' over and over." He paused. "Cole, I've seen a lot of grief in my time. I've seen women who lost children. That's what's in her face right now. That's what's in her voice." Cole turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the wagon so hard his knuckles went white. This couldn't be happening. His father wouldn't have lied to him about something like this. James was Tommy's father. Maggie was dead. These were facts, immutable as mountains, solid as the ground beneath his feet. Except Maggie wasn't dead. She was in the hotel right now, 20 yards away, and she had papers that said she was someone's mother. "Uncle Cole?" Tommy's small voice cut through the roaring in Cole's ears. "Why does your face look scary?" Cole forced himself to breathe, forced his expression to smooth out. He turned back to the boy and managed something that might pass for a smile. "Nothing's wrong, buddy." Uncle Cole just remembered something he forgot to do. He looked at Mackenzie. "Can you do me a favor? Can you take Tommy over to Miss Betty's, get him some lunch? I'll be there in 30 minutes to pick him up." Mackenzie nodded slowly. "You sure you want to do this now?" "No." Cole lifted Tommy down from the wagon and handed him to the sheriff. "But I don't think I have a choice." He watched Mackenzie carry the boy toward the restaurant, watched Tommy wave back at him with that trusting smile that made Cole's heart hurt. Then he turned toward the hotel, each step feeling like he was walking toward a cliff edge in the dark, knowing he was about to fall, but unable to stop moving forward. The hotel lobby was dim and cool after the bright heat of the street. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her desk, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Cole's expression. "Room 7, she said quietly. "She's been expecting you." Cole climbed the stairs, each step an effort. His hand shook slightly as he raised it to knock on the door marked with a tarnished brass 7. For a moment he hesitated, tempted to turn around and walk away, to pretend this wasn't happening, to go back to his simple life of raising his brother's son and trying not to think about all the things he'd lost. But then he heard movement inside the room, heard the soft sound of someone catching their breath, and he knew it was too late for retreat. The door opened, and Cole Brennan found himself face to face with the only woman he'd ever loved, the woman he'd been told was dead, the woman who was looking at him like she was seeing a ghost. "Cole?" Maggie Sullivan whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God, they told me you died at Gettysburg. They said you were killed in Pickett's charge. They told me you died of influenza." Cole's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Winter of '63. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Two people who'd been torn apart by war and lies and circumstance. Two people who'd mourned each other as dead for nearly 4 years. Then Maggie's eyes filled with tears again, and she said the words that would change everything. "Cole, where is my son?" Cole stood in the doorway of room 7, his hand still raised from knocking, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Maggie Sullivan wasn't just alive. She was here, standing 3 feet away from him, real as the floorboards beneath his boots and twice as devastating. She looked different than he remembered. Older, of course, though she couldn't be more than 28. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun instead of the loose curls she'd worn as a girl. She wore a simple gray traveling dress, practical and worn, not the cheerful calicos she'd favored before the war. But her eyes were the same, that impossible blue that had haunted his dreams for 4 years, though now they were red-rimmed from crying and filled with something that looked like hope and terror mixed together. "My son," she repeated, and her voice cracked on the words. "Cole, please. The sheriff said you have a little boy, a 3-year-old. I need to see him." "Wait." Cole held up his hand, his mind racing to catch up with what was happening. "Wait. You think Tommy is your son?" "Tommy." Maggie's hand went to her throat, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You named him Tommy." "I was going to call him Thomas after my father, but I never got the chance to tell you before you left for the war." The floor seemed to drop out from under Cole's feet. "Maggie, I don't understand what's happening. My father told me you died in '63. He sent me a letter. I was at Fredericksburg when I got it, and He stopped, the memory still raw after all these years. "I thought I'd lost you. And I thought I'd lost you." Maggie stepped closer, her hands twisted together in front of her. "Cole, Someone has been lying to both of us. Someone has been keeping us apart, keeping me from my baby." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her hands shaking. "I have his birth certificate, born April 15th, 1869, in Denver, Colorado. Mother, Margaret Ann Sullivan. Father, Cole Thomas Brennan." Cole took the paper with numb fingers. The document looked official, with an embossed seal from Denver Territory and a doctor's signature at the bottom. The dates matched. Everything matched. Everything except the story his father had told him. "This doesn't make sense." Cole's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "My father told me Tommy was James's son. That James got a saloon girl pregnant in Denver, then died in a bar fight. That the girl died in childbirth, and I was the boy's only family." Maggie's face had gone pale. "James? Your brother James?" She shook her head violently. "Cole, I never knew your brother. I barely remember what he looked like. The only Brennan man I ever loved was you. Then how did you end up in Denver? How did you end up?" Cole couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't ask the question that was tearing him apart inside. "Your father paid me to leave." The words came out flat, bitter. "A week after you left for the war, I realized I was pregnant. I was terrified, but I was also happy because I thought you'd come home and we'd get married and everything would be all right." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was so naive. My father knew you were pregnant. I told him. I thought he'd be happy about having a grandchild, thought it would make him want you to come home safe." Maggie wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Instead, he offered me $500 to leave town and never contact you again. He said I was beneath your family's station, that you'd never marry a poor girl like me, even if we had been courting. He said if I really loved you, I'd take the money and disappear, so you could make something of yourself without being tied down." Cole felt sick. "And you took it. I was 17 years old, pregnant, and terrified." Maggie's voice rose, then broke. "My father had just died. My mother was too sick to work, and I had nowhere to go. Your father said if I didn't take the money and leave, he'd make sure everyone in town knew I was carrying a bastard child. He'd make sure I couldn't work anywhere, couldn't find a room to rent, couldn't survive." She turned away, her shoulders shaking. "So yes, I took the money. I took it and I went to Denver and I found work as a seamstress and I had our baby all alone in a charity hospital." "Why didn't you write to me?" Cole heard the accusation in his own voice and hated it, but he couldn't stop the words from coming. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I did write." Maggie spun back to face him, anger flashing in her eyes now. "I wrote you 20 letters, Cole. 20. I sent them to your regiment, to the field hospital after Fredericksburg, to every address I could find. And you know what came back?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. "This, returned with 'Soldier Deceased' stamped across it." Cole took the envelope with shaking hands. It was addressed to him in Maggie's careful script, sent to the 5th Iowa Infantry in the winter of '63, and stamped across it in official military ink were the words, "Return to sender, soldier killed in action." "My father," Cole said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn like a sickness in his gut. "My father had connections in the quartermaster's office. He could have had letters redirected, returned, destroyed. He told me you died at Gettysburg." Maggie's voice was hollow now, exhausted. "He sent me a telegram in July of '63, official military telegram saying Lieutenant Cole Brennan had been killed in Pickett's charge. He even sent me a copy of a death certificate. I wasn't at Gettysburg. I was recovering from Fredericksburg in a field hospital in Maryland." Cole felt the room spinning around him. "My father lied to both of us, about everything. Not just to us." Maggie's hand pressed against her stomach. "To Tommy, too. Cole, I thought my baby was dead. 3 months after he was born, your father showed up in Denver. He said he'd had a change of heart, that he wanted to help me and the baby, that he'd arranged for us to come back east where he could support us properly." Cole already knew where this was going, could see the trap his father had laid with the cold precision of a military campaign. "He took Tommy," Maggie continued, her voice breaking. "He said he was just taking him for a walk, that I should rest. I'd been up all night with the baby, I was exhausted, And I trusted him because he was your father, and I was so relieved that someone was finally helping me." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "When I woke up, they were both gone. There was a note saying Tommy had died of fever in the night, that he'd already arranged for burial, that it was better for me to remember him sleeping peacefully rather than see his body." Jesus Christ. Cole felt like he might vomit. "Maggie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." "I know you didn't." She opened her eyes and looked at him, and in that look was all the pain and grief and lost years between them. "I went to the cemetery. I put flowers on the grave. I mourned my baby for 3 years. Her voice hardened. "But 6 months ago, I saw a newspaper article about a rancher in Montana Territory named Cole Brennan. It mentioned he was raising his young nephew after his brother's death. It described the boy, blonde hair and blue eyes, about 3 years old. You came all this way on a chance." "I came because a mother knows her child." Maggie stepped closer, her hands reaching out but not quite touching him. "Cole, I need to see him. If I'm wrong, if he's really James's son somehow, I'll leave and never bother you again. But if he's mine, if he's ours—" Her voice broke. "Please, I've been dead inside for 3 years. Let me see my baby." Cole looked at the birth certificate in his hands, at the dates that matched, at the names that made sense of everything that had never quite added up about Tommy's origins. He thought about his father's deathbed confession, how the old man had seemed almost guilty when he'd handed over the infant and told Cole to raise him right. How many lies had his father told? How many lives had he destroyed with his pride and his controlling nature and his absolute certainty that he knew what was best for everyone? "He's at Miss Betty's restaurant," Cole said quietly, "having lunch with the sheriff." Maggie's hand flew to her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. "Can I see him?" "Please, Cole, I just need to see him." Cole nodded slowly, then held up a hand. "But Maggie, you need to understand something. That boy has known me as his uncle for 3 years. I'm the only parent he's ever had. Whatever happened, whatever my father did, Tommy is innocent in all of this. We have to think about what's best for him." "I know." Maggie's voice was fierce. "I've thought about nothing else for 3 years. I don't want to hurt him or scare him. I just need to see him, to know he's really alive and safe and loved." They walked down the stairs together, neither speaking, both lost in the magnitude of what had been revealed. As they stepped out onto the street, Cole felt the weight of every lie, every deception, every stolen year pressing down on him like physical force. His father had destroyed 3 lives to protect some outdated notion of family honor, had stolen a child from his mother, lied to his son about the woman he loved, created an elaborate fiction that had kept them all apart and suffering. And now, walking toward Miss Betty's restaurant, where a little blonde boy sat eating lunch and calling a man uncle who was actually his father, Cole had to figure out how to unravel 3 years of lies without destroying the innocent child at the center of it all. "Cole," Maggie said softly as they approached the restaurant, "before we go in, I need to know. Do you hate me for taking the money, for leaving, for not trying harder to find you?" Cole stopped walking and looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the girl he'd fallen in love with behind the church, the girl who'd made him believe in a future beyond war and death. But he also saw a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd survived loss that would have destroyed most people, who'd traveled 800 miles on nothing but hope in a newspaper article. "I don't hate you," he said. "I could never hate you, Maggie. I loved you then, and He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. "We were both victims of my father's manipulation. Both of us lost 3 years we'll never get back. But we're still alive, and so is Tommy. That has to be enough to build on." Maggie nodded, taking a shaky breath. Then together they walked into Miss Betty's restaurant to face the little boy, who would either confirm or destroy what remained of Cole's carefully constructed world. The bell above Miss Betty's door chimed as Cole pushed it open, the familiar sound suddenly feeling ominous. Inside, the restaurant smelled of fresh bread and coffee, normally comforting scents that now made Cole's stomach turn. Sheriff Mackenzie sat at a corner table with Tommy, who was working his way through a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon with the single-minded focus only a 3-year-old could muster. Cole felt Maggie freeze beside him as she caught sight of the boy. Her hand gripped his arm so tightly he could feel her fingernails digging in through his shirt sleeve. He heard her breath catch, heard a small sound escape her throat that was halfway between a sob and a prayer. Tommy looked up at the sound of the door, his face lighting up when he saw Cole. "Uncle Cole! Miss Betty made me eggs!" He held up his fork triumphantly, a piece of egg dangling from it. "I can see that, buddy." Cole's voice came out steadier than he felt. He was acutely aware of Maggie beside him, trembling like a leaf in a storm, her eyes fixed on Tommy with an intensity that made Cole's chest ache. "Tommy, there's someone I'd like you to meet." But Tommy wasn't looking at Cole anymore. His gaze had shifted to Maggie, and something strange was happening on his small face. His fork lowered slowly to his plate, his head tilted to one side in that way it did when he was trying to figure something out. "Pretty lady," he said softly, his blue eyes wide and curious. Maggie made a sound like she'd been struck. She took a tentative step forward, then another, moving slowly as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. Cole watched, his heart pounding, as she knelt down beside Tommy's chair, bringing herself to his eye level. "Hello, sweetheart," Maggie whispered, her voice thick with tears she was fighting to hold back. "My name is Maggie." Tommy studied her face with that serious expression he got sometimes, the one that made him look older than his 3 years. Then, to Cole's complete shock, he reached out one small hand and touched Maggie's cheek. "You're sad," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "Your face is leaking." A laugh that was half sob burst from Maggie's lips. "Yes, baby. I'm sad, but I'm also happy. Very, very happy." "Why?" Tommy's finger traced down her cheek, following the path of a tear. "Uncle Cole says happy and sad don't live in the same house." "Sometimes they do, sweetheart. Sometimes they live together for a little while." Maggie's hands were shaking as she reached out, hovering near Tommy but not quite touching him, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she made contact. "Can I tell you something?" Tommy nodded, his young face serious. "Okay. You have very beautiful eyes. They're the same color as the sky in summer." "Uncle Cole says I got my mama's eyes." Tommy's voice was proud. "He says she was pretty like the sky, too." Maggie's face crumpled, and this time she couldn't hold back the tears. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Oh, God, Cole." Sheriff Mackenzie had stood up, moving quietly to give them space, but staying close enough to intervene if needed. He caught Cole's eye, a question written clearly on his face. Cole nodded once, confirming what the sheriff had already suspected. Tommy, unaware of the emotional earthquake happening around him, reached out and patted Maggie's shoulder the way Cole always patted his when he was upset. "Don't be sad, pretty lady. Uncle Cole says tears are just feelings that got too big to stay inside." "Your Uncle Cole is very wise." Maggie's voice broke on the words. She looked up at Cole, her eyes filled with such raw pain and joy and desperate hope that Cole had to look away. "He must be a very good uncle." "The best," Tommy agreed, then frowned slightly. "But sometimes he's sad too. At night when he thinks I'm sleeping, I hear him walking around and he sounds like he's looking for something he lost." Cole's throat tightened. He hadn't realized Tommy was aware of his late-night pacing, the hours he spent trying to outrun his loneliness and grief for a life he'd never gotten to live. Maggie stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Tommy's face, drinking in every detail like a woman dying of thirst. "May I sit with you while you finish your breakfast?" she asked him gently. Tommy considered this with the seriousness of a judge passing sentence, then nodded. "Okay, but you have to tell me a story. Uncle Cole always tells stories during meals." "I can do that." Maggie pulled out a chair and sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap as if to keep herself from reaching out and pulling the boy into her arms. "What kind of stories do you like?" "Stories about brave people who aren't scared of anything," Tommy declared, attacking his eggs again. Cole watched as Maggie's face softened, a sad smile playing at her lips. "I know a story about someone very brave. Would you like to hear it?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically, his mouth full of egg. "Once upon a time," Maggie began, her voice steady despite the tears still tracking down her face, "there was a woman who lost something very precious to her, the most precious thing in the whole world." "What did she lose?" Tommy asked, leaning forward with interest. Her heart. Maggie's eyes found Cole's across the table, held them. Someone she loved very much had to go away, and she thought she would never see him again. And then something even worse happened. Someone took her baby away from her. Tommy's eyes went wide. That's mean. Babies need their mamas. Yes, they do. Maggie's voice trembled but held. So this woman was very sad for a very long time. She cried every day and every night. But do you know what made her brave? What? She never stopped hoping. Even when everyone told her that hoping was silly, even when everyone said her baby was gone forever, she kept hoping. And she kept looking. She traveled very far, through deserts and over mountains, searching for any sign that her baby might still be alive. Tommy had stopped eating, completely absorbed in the story. Did she find the baby? Maggie reached out slowly, carefully, and touched Tommy's hand where it rested on the table. The boy didn't pull away. I think, she said softly, that maybe she just did. For a long moment, the restaurant was silent except for the clock ticking on the wall and the sound of Miss Betty clattering dishes in the kitchen. Tommy looked down at Maggie's hand covering his, then up at her face, then over at Cole with a confused expression. I don't understand, he said quietly. Cole moved then, coming around the table to kneel beside both of them. His heart was hammering so hard he could barely hear his own voice. Tommy, remember how I told you that your mama had to go away when you were a baby? That she couldn't stay with you? Tommy nodded slowly. You said she was in heaven watching over me. I thought she was. Cole's voice was rough with emotion. But I was wrong, buddy. Someone lied to me. Someone told me things that weren't true. He glanced at Maggie, saw the fear and hope warring in her eyes. Your mama didn't go to heaven. She's been looking for you all this time, and now she's found you. Tommy's gaze swung back to Maggie, his expression uncertain. You're my mama. Yes, baby. Maggie's voice broke completely. I'm your mama. I've loved you since before you were born, and I've been looking for you every single day since someone took you away from me. I'm so sorry I couldn't find you sooner. I'm so sorry. Cole watched Tommy's face, saw the wheels turning in that sharp little mind. The boy looked at Maggie, really looked at her, taking in her blonde hair that matched his own, her blue eyes that were exactly like the ones he saw in the mirror every morning. Do I look like you? Tommy asked suddenly. Maggie laughed through her tears. Yes, sweetheart, you look just like me. You have my hair and my eyes and my smile. Uncle Cole says I don't look like the Brennan family. He says I must take after my mama's side. Tommy's brow furrowed. Is that why I look like you? Because I'm your baby? That's exactly why. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. Then he looked at Cole. Are you still my Uncle Cole? The question hit Cole like a punch to the gut. He exchanged a glance with Maggie, seeing his own panic reflected in her eyes. This was the moment where they had to decide how much truth a 3-year-old could handle. How much more could they unravel without breaking him? I'll always be your Uncle Cole, Cole said finally, because it was the truth that mattered most right now. That doesn't change. But there's something else you should know. I'm not just your uncle. I'm also... He's your papa, Maggie finished softly, her hand finding Cole's where it rested on Tommy's shoulder. I know this is confusing, sweetheart. But the man who's been taking care of you all this time, who loves you so much, he's your papa, and I'm your mama, and we both love you more than anything in the whole world. Tommy looked between them, his young face scrunched up in concentration. Cole held his breath, waiting for tears or confusion or fear. But instead, Tommy's expression cleared, and he nodded once, as if something that had been bothering him for a long time had suddenly made sense. That's good, he said simply. I always wanted a mom and a papa. All the other kids have both. He looked at Maggie with sudden shyness. Can I hug you? Uncle Cole says hugs are for people who love each other. Maggie's sob this time was pure joy. Oh yes, baby. Please. Tommy slid down from his chair and walked into Maggie's arms. And when she wrapped him up and held him close for the first time in 3 years, Cole had to turn away to hide his own tears. Behind him, he heard Sheriff Mackenzie clear his throat roughly and head for the door, giving them privacy for this moment that was too big and too raw for witnesses. "You're soft," Tommy said, his voice muffled against Maggie's shoulder. "And you smell nice, like flowers." "And you're perfect," Maggie whispered into his hair. "You're absolutely perfect, and I'm never letting you go again. Never, never, never." Cole stood there in Miss Betty's restaurant, watching the woman he'd loved and the boy he'd raised come together for the first time, and felt his carefully constructed world finish its complete collapse. But in the rubble of all those lies and lost years, something new was beginning to take shape, something that looked almost like hope. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows of the hotel parlor when the three of them finally sat down to talk about the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. Tommy had fallen asleep on Maggie's lap, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day, his small hand clutching a fistful of her gray dress. She stroked his hair with a tenderness that made Cole's chest ache, her face transformed by a joy so profound it was almost painful to witness. "We need to talk about practicalities," Cole said quietly, not wanting to break the spell, but knowing they couldn't avoid reality forever. "About what happens now." Maggie looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd been reunited, Cole saw fear flicker across her face. "You're not going to try to take him from me, are you?" "Cole, I know you've been raising him. I know he loves you, but he's my son. I have legal papers proving it." "Our son," Cole corrected gently. "And no, Maggie, I'm not going to take him from you. I've spent 3 years believing I was just his uncle, watching him grow and wishing he was mine. Now I know he is mine, and so are you if you'll have us." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But we need to think about Tommy, about what's best for him. What's best for him is having both his parents." Maggie's voice was fierce. "He deserves to have a mother and a father who love him." "I agree." Cole leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But Maggie, he doesn't know this town. He doesn't know you yet. His whole world is my ranch, the animals, the routine we've built together. If you try to take him away from everything familiar, it'll break his heart." "Then what are you suggesting?" Maggie's arms tightened protectively around Tommy. "That I leave him here with you and visit occasionally?" "Cole, I've been without my baby for 3 years. I can't go through that again." "I'm not asking you to." Cole ran his hand through his hair, frustrated by how complicated this all was. "I'm suggesting you stay. Here in Redemption Creek. With us." Maggie stared at him. "With you?" "At the ranch. There's plenty of room. The house my father built has 4 bedrooms, and I only use 1. Cole could feel his face heating. "You could have your own room, your own space. You could be with Tommy every day, watch him grow up, be his mother, and I could be his father. We could raise him together." "As what exactly?" Maggie's voice was careful, guarded. "As business partners? As friends? As 2 people tied together by a child, but nothing else?" Cole met her eyes, saw the same question he'd been asking himself since they'd walked out of Miss Betty's. What were they to each other now? The boy and girl who'd fallen in love behind a church 8 years ago were gone, changed by war and loss and betrayal. But sitting here, watching her hold their son, Cole felt the stirrings of something that might become love again if they gave it the chance. "As Tommy's parents first," he said slowly. "Everything else we figure out as we go. No pressure, no expectations, just 2 people trying to do right by their child. And if the town talks, if people ask questions about why you're living with a woman who isn't your wife, let them talk." Cole's voice was harder than he intended. "My father destroyed our lives because he cared too much about what people thought, about reputation and status, and keeping up appearances. I won't make the same mistake. Tommy needs his mother, and if the good people of Redemption Creek don't like it, they can go to hell." A small smile played at Maggie's lips, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "You've gotten harder, Cole Brennan. The boy I knew wouldn't have said something like that. The boy you knew hadn't been through a war." Cole's voice was quiet. "Hadn't watched good men die for nothing. Hadn't learned that the rules society makes are often just chains to keep people from being happy." Maggie was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Tommy's sleeping face. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. What if it doesn't work? What if we can't get along, can't figure out how to live together? What if Tommy gets hurt in the middle of our mess? Then we'll deal with it together, like parents do. Cole stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the street where people were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that his entire world had been remade in the space of a few hours. Maggie, I'm not going to pretend this will be easy. We're strangers now in a lot of ways. We've both changed, but we have something that matters more than our history or our hurt feelings. We have a son who needs both of us. I'm scared, Maggie admitted. I'm scared I won't know how to be his mother. I've missed 3 years of his life. I don't know what he likes to eat for breakfast, or what stories help him fall asleep, or what makes him laugh. You'll learn. Cole turned back to face her. Just like I had to learn. Just like any parent learns. And I'll help you. I'll teach you everything I know about him. Why? The question burst from Maggie like she couldn't hold it back. Why are you being so kind about this? I took money from your father and left town. I gave up looking for you when the letters came back. I wasn't strong enough to keep fighting. You were 17 and alone and terrified. Cole moved back to sit across from her. And my father was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to use people's fears against them. You're not to blame for what he did, Maggie. Neither of us is. We were both victims. But you lost 3 years with your son because of me. No. I lost 3 years because my father was a controlling bastard who thought he knew better than everyone else how their lives should go. Cole's voice was firm. You lost 3 years too. Tommy lost 3 years of having his mother. My father is the one who should be blamed, and he's dead. All we can do now is move forward and try to build something good out of the wreckage he left behind. Tommy stirred in Maggie's arms, his eyes fluttering open. He looked around, momentarily confused, then relaxed when he saw both Cole and Maggie watching him. Did I fall asleep? He asked groggily. You did, buddy. Cole smiled at him. Big day. Very big day. Tommy yawned and stretched, then looked at Maggie with sudden seriousness. Are you still my mama? I didn't dream that. I'm still your mama, sweetheart. Maggie's voice was thick with emotion. I'll always be your mama. Nothing can change that. Good. Tommy nodded, satisfied, then turned to Cole. Are we going home soon? The chickens need feeding. Actually, Tommy, I wanted to talk to you about that. Cole knelt down so he was at eye level with the boy. How would you feel if your mama came to live with us at the ranch? She could have her own room, and she could be there every day when you wake up and when you go to sleep. Tommy's face lit up. Really? She can stay forever? If she wants to, Cole said, glancing at Maggie. I want to, Maggie said quickly. More than anything. Then yes, buddy, she can stay forever. Tommy threw his arms around Cole's neck, nearly knocking him over with the force of his hug. This is the best day ever, he declared. I got a mama and a papa all in one day. Cole closed his eyes, holding his son tight, feeling Maggie's hand rest gently on his shoulder. They were a family now, broken and rebuilt and held together by this small boy who somehow understood everything that mattered and none of the complicated details that didn't. Later, as they loaded Maggie's single trunk into Cole's wagon and prepared for the ride back to the ranch, Sheriff Mackenzie pulled Cole aside one last time. You sure about this, Cole? The older man asked quietly. Taking in a woman you haven't seen in years? The town's going to talk. Let them talk. Cole glanced over at where Maggie was helping Tommy climb into the wagon, both of them laughing at something. I've got my family back, Tom. After 4 years of thinking I'd lost everything that mattered, I've got a second chance. I'm not going to waste it worrying about gossip. Mackenzie nodded slowly, a smile creasing his weathered face. Your father wouldn't have approved. Good. Cole's voice was hard. My father's approval destroyed enough lives. Time someone in the Brennan family started thinking for themselves. As they rode out of town with Tommy perched between them on the wagon seat, chattering excitedly about the ranch and the animals and all the things he wanted to show his mama, Cole felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, The broken pieces of his life could be put back together into something even stronger than before. Maggie caught his eye over Tommy's head, and in her smile he saw the same cautious hope. They had a long road ahead of them, full of difficult conversations and painful truths, and the hard work of building trust from ruins. But they also had Tommy, innocent and joyful and utterly convinced that having both his parents was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe, Cole thought as the ranch came into view over the ridge, maybe it was. The first week at the ranch tested them all in ways Cole hadn't anticipated. Maggie moved into the bedroom that had once belonged to Cole's mother, a room that still smelled faintly of lavender and old memories. She unpacked her single trunk with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making do with little, her few possessions barely filling half the dresser. Tommy adapted with the remarkable resilience of childhood, treating Maggie's presence as if she'd always been there. He dragged her around the property, showing her everything, his small hand firmly gripping hers as he introduced her to each horse, cow, and chicken by name. Maggie followed with patient attention, learning the rhythms of ranch life even as she struggled with the physical demands of it. "I'm useless," she said one evening after dinner, staring at her blistered hands. She'd spent the afternoon helping Cole mend fence posts, work she wasn't remotely prepared for. "I can sew a straight seam and balance accounts, but I don't know the first thing about ranching." "You're not useless." Cole took her hands in his, examining the raw skin with concern. "You're learning." "There's a difference." He fetched the salve he used for rope burns and began applying it gently to her palms. "Besides, your sewing skills are more valuable than you think. Half the shirts Tommy and I own have holes in them. That's because you're both hard on clothes." Maggie managed a small smile despite the sting of the salve. "Tommy tears his knees out, climbing everything in sight, and you work yourself like you're trying to prove something." Cole paused in his ministrations. "What do you mean?" "I mean you work from dawn until you can barely stand, then you check on the animals twice more before bed. You never stop, Cole. It's like you're afraid if you slow down, everything will fall apart." "Maybe I am." Cole finished with her hands and sat back, the honesty of her observation cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. "This ranch is all I have. All Tommy and I have. If it fails, if I can't make it work, then what was it all for? The war? The loss? The years of doing this alone?" "You're not alone anymore," Maggie said quietly. "You have me now. And Tommy has both of us. The ranch doesn't have to carry all the weight of proving your worth, Cole. You're already worth something just by being you." The words settled between them like a blessing Cole didn't know how to accept. Before he could respond, Tommy appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "I can't sleep," he announced. "The wind sounds scary." Maggie stood immediately, her maternal instincts overriding any discomfort from her blistered hands. "Come here, sweetheart. Let's get you back to bed." Cole watched from the doorway as Maggie tucked Tommy in, her movements tentative but tender. She sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his blonde hair back from his forehead. "Will you sing to me?" Tommy asked. "Uncle Cole always sings when the wind is loud." "I'm not sure I know any good songs," Maggie admitted. "Uncle Cole sings about soldiers and horses and trains, but Mama songs can be different if you want." Maggie's breath caught at the casual way he called her Mama now, as if the word had always belonged to him. She cleared her throat and began to sing, her voice soft and slightly off-key, a lullaby about stars and dreams and being safe. Tommy's eyes drifted closed before she finished the first verse. Maggie continued singing anyway, her hand resting gently on his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. When she finally stood to leave, she found Cole still in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You have a beautiful voice," he said quietly as they walked back to the main room. "I'm terribly out of practice." He didn't seem to mind. Cole poured them each a cup of coffee from the pot that always sat warming on the stove. "You're good with him, Maggie. Better than you give yourself credit for. He makes it easy." Maggie accepted the cup, wrapping her sore hands around its warmth. "He's such a good boy, Cole. You've done an amazing job raising him. We both had to learn as we went along." Cole settled into his chair, the one that faced both the fire and the door, another habit from the war. "Those first few months were terrifying. I had no idea what I was doing. I was convinced I was going to break him somehow." But you didn't. You made him feel safe and loved, and that's what matters most. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl around the house and the fire crackle in the hearth. It was Maggie who finally broke the silence. Cole, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. Do you resent me for taking your father's money and leaving? For not fighting harder to find you? Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way that made Cole's chest ache. Because I would understand if you did. I resent myself sometimes. Cole was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I did resent you at first. When the sheriff told me you were alive, my first thought was anger. How could you have given up? How could you have believed I was dead without proof? He paused, meeting her eyes. But then I saw you with Tommy, saw how you looked at him, how much you'd been hurting. And I realized you were just as much a victim of my father's manipulation as I was. Maybe more because you were younger and alone and had no one to turn to. That doesn't excuse what I did. It doesn't have to excuse it. It just has to explain it. Cole leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Maggie, we can spend the rest of our lives picking apart the past, assigning blame, cataloging every mistake and missed opportunity. Or we can accept that we were both hurt by someone we should have been able to trust and focus on making sure Tommy never experiences that kind of betrayal. I want that, Maggie whispered. I want to focus on him, on giving him the childhood he deserves. Then that's what we'll do. The next day brought visitors. Cole was working in the barn when he heard horses approaching, and his hand instinctively went to the rifle he kept propped near the door. But it was only the Hendersons from town, their wagon loaded with supplies. Mrs. Henderson climbed down with the determined expression of a woman on a mission. Her husband stayed on the wagon, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Henderson began, her voice tight with barely concealed disapproval. I heard there's a woman living here now. Unmarried, with you and the boy. Cole straightened, his jaw tightening. That's right. The boy's mother. She has every right to be here. The boy's mother who abandoned him as an infant and only now decided to come back? Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. That's the story you're going with? That's the truth, except for the abandoning part. She was told he was dead. My father lied to both of us. Cole's voice was hard. Not that it's any of your business, Mrs. Henderson. It becomes my business when you're setting a bad example for the children of this community. The woman drew herself up to her full height. What kind of message does it send when an unmarried man and woman live together under one roof? Before Cole could respond, Maggie appeared from the house, Tommy at her side. She'd heard the conversation, and her face was pale but determined. Mrs. Henderson, Maggie said calmly, walking over to stand beside Cole. I appreciate your concern for community morals, but I'm not leaving my son again. If that troubles you, I suggest you take it up with God, because it's his forgiveness I need, not yours. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Well, I never. My mama came back to find me, Tommy piped up, his small voice carrying across the yard. She thought I was dead, but I wasn't. Uncle Cole says that's called a miracle. Don't you believe in miracles, Mrs. Henderson? The woman's face softened slightly as she looked at Tommy's earnest expression. Of course I do, child. Then why are you mad that my mama got her miracle? The simple logic of a 3-year-old hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth, closed it again, then seemed to deflate slightly. I'm not mad, child, she said finally. I just worry about propriety. Then worry about your own propriety and leave ours alone, Cole said, his voice brooking no argument. Maggie is Tommy's mother, and she's staying. Anyone who has a problem with that can take their business elsewhere. The Hendersons left shortly after, but Cole knew word would spread. By evening, he'd had 3 more visitors, all with similar concerns about the scandal of Maggie's presence. Each time, he gave the same answer. She was Tommy's mother. She was staying, and anyone who didn't like it could keep their opinions to themselves. That night, after Tommy was asleep and the house was quiet, Maggie found Cole on the porch, staring out at the darkened prairie. I'm causing you trouble, she said quietly, with the town. Maybe I should. Don't, Cole cut her off. Don't even think about leaving. I meant what I said, Maggie. Let them talk. Let them judge. Tommy needs his mother more than I need their approval. But your business will survive. Most of my customers are ranchers who care more about honest dealing than gossip. He turned to face her. Besides, there's a simple solution if you're really worried about propriety. What's that? We could get married. The words hung between them. Not quite a proposal, but not quite not one either. Maggie stared at him, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. Cole, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. But think about it practically. We're already living together, raising a child together. Marriage would legitimize everything in the eyes of the town and give Tommy the family name he deserves. Cole paused. I'm not talking about a love match, Maggie. Just a practical arrangement between two people committed to raising their son together. A marriage of convenience, Maggie said slowly. Yes, we'd still have our own rooms, our own lives. Nothing would have to change except the paperwork and what people call us. Maggie was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. Finally, she spoke. Can I think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. But as Cole lay in bed that night, listening to the house settle around him, he wondered if he'd really meant what he'd said about it being purely practical. Because the truth was, having Maggie here, seeing her with Tommy, talking with her by firelight, had awakened something in him he'd thought died at Fredericksburg. And he wasn't sure anymore whether he wanted a marriage of convenience or something much more complicated and dangerous to his carefully guarded heart. 3 weeks had passed since Cole's proposal, and Maggie still hadn't given him an answer. The question hung between them like morning fog, present but unspoken, coloring every interaction with a tension that was both uncomfortable and strangely thrilling. Cole didn't press her for a decision. He'd said his piece and left the ball in her court, though he found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way lamplight caught in her hair, how her laugh sounded when Tommy said something unexpectedly wise, the competent grace with which she'd learned to handle ranch work. It was on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after the proposal, that everything changed. Cole was in the barn repairing a broken harness when Tommy came running in, his face pale with fear. Uncle Cole! Mama fell! She's bleeding! Cole's heart stopped. He dropped the leather and ran, Tommy racing beside him back toward the house. He found Maggie on the kitchen floor, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead where she'd apparently hit the corner of the table. She was conscious but dazed, one hand pressed to the wound. I'm fine, she said immediately, though her voice was shaky. I just got dizzy and lost my balance. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Cole knelt beside her, gently moving her hand to examine the cut. It was deep, would need stitches. Tommy, get me the medical kit from the shelf, the wooden box with the red cross on it. The boy ran to obey, his small face serious with purpose. Cole helped Maggie into a chair, then retrieved clean cloth to press against the wound. When's the last time you ate? He asked quietly. Maggie's silence was answer enough. Maggie, you can't skip meals and expect to work like you have been. Your body won't take it. I know. Her voice was small. I just wanted to prove I could do this, that I wasn't a burden. You and Tommy need so little food and supplies are expensive, and I thought if I ate less, there would be more for... Stop! Cole's voice was firm. Maggie, look at me. She did, her blue eyes swimming with tears that had nothing to do with the pain in her head. You are not a burden. You are Tommy's mother and you belong here. That means you eat 3 meals a day, the same as him and me. Do you understand? But I'm not contributing enough. I can't do half the work you do, and I'm using up resources. You're raising our son. That's worth more than any ranch work. Cole's hands were gentle as he cleaned the wound, but his voice was steel. You're teaching him kindness and patience. You sing him to sleep every night. You've made this house feel like a home instead of just a place I live. That's not nothing, Maggie. That's everything. Tommy had returned with the medical kit, his face worried as he watched Cole stitch his mother's forehead with the same careful precision he used to mend torn harnesses. Is Mama going to be okay? The boy asked quietly. She's going to be fine, buddy. but she needs to eat better and stop working so hard. Think you can help me make sure she does that? Tommy nodded solemnly. I can watch her like you watch me. Despite everything, Maggie laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her stitches. I'm being watched over by a 3-year-old. How humiliating. You're being loved by a 3-year-old, Cole corrected. There's a difference. After he'd bandaged Maggie's head and settled her on the sofa with strict instructions to rest, Cole made a large breakfast for all of them. Tommy sat next to his mother, his small hand holding hers, occasionally patting her arm for reassurance. Uncle Cole, Tommy said as they ate, why are you and Mama not married like other mamas and papas? The question hung in the air like a gunshot. Cole glanced at Maggie, saw her face flush red. That's a good question, buddy, Cole said carefully. The truth is, I asked your mama to marry me, but she hasn't decided if she wants to yet. Why not? Tommy looked genuinely confused. Don't you love each other? Out of the mouths of babes. Cole felt his throat tighten. It's complicated, Tommy. Mrs. Henderson says you have to love someone to marry them. She says that's the rule. Tommy looked between them with that serious expression he got when he was working through something important. So if you're not married, does that mean you don't love each other? Maggie set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. Tommy, sweetheart, love is more complicated than Mrs. Henderson makes it sound. But do you love Uncle Cole? The question hung there, impossible to avoid. Maggie looked at Cole, and in her eyes he saw everything she'd been holding back for weeks. The fear, the hope, the memories of who they'd been, and the uncertainty of who they were now. Yes, she said quietly. I do love him. I never stopped loving him. Tommy turned to Cole with the relentless logic of childhood. Do you love Mama? Cole looked at Maggie, at the woman who'd traveled 800 miles on nothing but hope, who'd fought for their son when everyone told her he was dead, who'd learned to rope cattle despite blistered hands and worked herself to exhaustion trying to prove her worth. Yes, he said, and the word felt like breaking open after years of being locked shut. I love her very much. Then why aren't you married? Tommy's voice held genuine bewilderment. Because, Maggie said slowly, her eyes never leaving Cole's. Sometimes grown-ups are afraid. We're afraid that if we try to be happy, something bad will happen to take it away again. We're afraid to trust that good things can last. That's silly, Tommy declared. Uncle Cole says being scared is okay, but staying scared is just wasting time you could spend being happy. Cole nearly choked on his coffee. I said that. Last month when I was scared of the dark, Tommy nodded firmly. You said fear is just your brain trying to keep you safe, but sometimes your brain is too careful and you have to be brave anyway. Cole looked at Maggie, saw his own wonder reflected in her face. Their 3-year-old son was giving them life advice, and it was better than anything they'd come up with themselves. He's right, Cole said softly. We've been scared for so long, both of us. Scared to hope, scared to trust, scared to believe we deserve another chance at happiness. I'm scared it won't work, Maggie admitted. I'm scared you'll wake up one day and realize you married me out of obligation, not love. I'm scared I'll never be good enough, that I'll always be the girl who took money and ran away. I'm scared too, Cole said. I'm scared I'll let you down, that I won't be the man you remember from before the war. I'm scared that the damage we've both been through is too much to overcome. He paused. But I'm more scared of wasting whatever time we have left being afraid instead of being together. Maggie was crying now, tears streaming down her face around the bandage on her forehead. Cole Brennan, is that a proposal? No. Cole stood and crossed to her, dropping to one knee beside the sofa. Tommy scrambled out of the way with an excited gasp. This is a proposal. Maggie Sullivan, I loved you when we were kids behind that church. I loved you through a war that tried to destroy everything good in the world. I loved you when I thought you were dead, and I love you now that you're alive and here and making my life complicated and beautiful and worth living. He took her hand in his. Will you marry me? Not as a practical arrangement, not to silence gossips, but because I want to spend every day we have left building a real family with you. Yes. Maggie's voice was choked with tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Tommy let out a whoop and launched himself at both of them, and they all ended up in a tangle on the floor, laughing and crying, and holding on to each other like they were afraid the moment might disappear. When's the wedding? Tommy demanded. Can I help? Can we have cake? We can have the biggest cake in Montana territory, Cole promised, ruffling the boy's hair. And yes, you can help. You can be my best man. What's a best man? The most important person at the wedding besides the bride and groom? The person who stands up with me and makes sure I don't mess up my vows. Tommy's chest puffed with pride. I can do that. I'm very good at making sure you don't mess up. Later, after Tommy had gone to bed, still chattering excitedly about weddings and cake, Cole and Maggie sat together on the porch swing his father had built years ago. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Are you sure? Maggie asked quietly. This is forever, Cole. There's no taking it back if we decide we made a mistake. I'm sure. Cole pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. I've wasted too many years already, Maggie. I don't want to waste any more being cautious about loving you. Your father would be furious if he could see this. Good. My father spent his whole life trying to control everyone around him, destroying happiness in the name of propriety and status. The best revenge I can think of is to be happy in spite of everything he did to prevent it. Maggie was quiet for a moment, then said, I want to tell Tommy the truth. About your father, about what happened. Not all the details, he's too young for that. But I want him to know the truth when he's old enough to understand. Agreed. No more lies, no more secrets. We build this family on truth from now on. They sat in comfortable silence watching the stars wheel overhead, both of them thinking about the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A war that separated them, a father who lied to keep them apart, a child stolen and mourned and miraculously found. 3 years of grief and loneliness that had finally, impossibly, led them back to each other. Cole, Maggie said softly, I'm still scared. So am I. He pressed a kiss to her temple, careful of the bandage. But we'll be scared together. And maybe that's all courage really is, being scared but moving forward anyway. Inside the house, Tommy dreamed of weddings and cake and having a real family like all the other children. And on the porch, two people who'd been broken by lies and loss and the cruelty of circumstance held each other under the vast Montana sky and chose finally to believe in second chances. The wedding would be simple, just the three of them and Sheriff Mackenzie as witness, held in the same church where Cole and Maggie had first kissed a lifetime ago. The town would talk, of course, but they'd made peace with that. Let them talk. Let them judge. What mattered was the family they were building from the ashes of their father's deception. And if sometimes in the quiet moments they thought about all the years they'd lost, all the time they could have had together if only one man hadn't been so determined to control their lives, they chose to focus instead on the years ahead, on Tommy growing up with both his parents, on the possibility of more children, on building a life not of convenience or obligation, but of genuine love and chosen commitment. It wouldn't be easy. They still had to learn to live together as partners instead of survivors. They still carried scars from the war and the lies and the grief, but they had something stronger than perfection. They had truth and love and a small boy who believed with absolute certainty that they belonged together. And maybe in the end, that was enough. 5 years later, the Brennan Ranch had transformed from a lonely outpost into a thriving homestead filled with laughter and life. Tommy, now 8 years old, had two younger sisters who followed him everywhere, their blonde hair and blue eyes marking them as unmistakably their mother's daughters. Cole had expanded the ranch, building a new barn and adding more cattle, but he'd learned to balance work with the life Maggie had taught him was worth living. The town of Redemption Creek had eventually accepted what they couldn't change. Some folks never stopped whispering, but most came to respect the family that Cole and Maggie had built from the ruins of betrayal and loss. Sheriff Mackenzie stood as godfather to all three children, and even Mrs. Henderson had softened, occasionally bringing by her famous apple pie. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the Montana sky stretched infinite above them, Cole and Maggie would sit on that same porch swing and marvel at how far they'd come. From two broken people who thought they'd lost everything, they'd become a family bound not by obligation or convenience, but by choice and love and the courage to believe in second chances. Tommy never learned the full truth about his grandfather's manipulation until he was grown, but he understood the important part. That love was stronger than lies, that family was built through commitment, not just blood, and that sometimes the best thing you could do was refuse to let the past destroy your future. And so this story ends not with perfect happiness, because life on the frontier was never perfect, but with something better, a family that chose each other every single day, built on truth and tested by hardship, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal when tended with patience and love. And there you have it, friends, a tale of love lost and found, of lies unraveled and truth reclaimed, of a family built from broken pieces into something stronger than steel. If this story of Cole, Maggie, and Tommy touched your heart, hit that like button and let us know in the comments, would you have taken the risk? Would you have opened your heart again after so much betrayal? What would you have done in Cole's boots or Maggie's shoes? Subscribe and ring that notification bell for more incredible Wild West stories where love conquers impossible odds, where second chances bloom in the harshest soil, and where family means more than blood. It means choosing each other every single day. Next time, we'll bring you another tale from the untamed frontier, where courage and compassion transform ordinary people into legends. Because that's what the American West was really about. People brave enough to rebuild their lives from ashes and create something beautiful in the wilderness. Drop a comment with your favorite moment from this story, and don't forget to check out our other Wild West romances where mail-order brides find unexpected love, outlaws discover redemption, and the frontier proves that home isn't a place. It's the people who refuse to give up on you. The frontier is calling, and your next favorite story is just one click away. Until then, remember, it's never too late for a second chance. And the strongest families are the ones built on truth and chosen love. See you on the trail, partners.